Hello and welcome back to Supposedly Fun. My name is Greg. Happy weekend. I am here today to film my Friday Reads video. I am filming this on a Friday. It will be posted on a Saturday as usual. That's kind of what I do. Apologies, I really did not get a whole lot posted this week. I only got one other video, one of my If You Liked This, try that, based on the next 10 books that I read in 2021. I will link that video down below if you would like to check that one out, but I really did not get a lot of anything else done on YouTube this week because it was a really crazy busy work week, and that pretty much bled into everything. I haven't had a lot of time to watch videos. Kieran from KD Books did a response to my video where I talked about the most recent book prize winners and whether or not I have read them. He tried to make a case for why I should read The Luminaries, I believe. And I say I believe because I haven't been able to watch the video yet. Every time I start that video this week, I get a phone call, I get an email I need to take care of, something happens, and that is the kind of week it has been. And being honest, that translated a little bit into reading, so I don't have a whole lot to report on, but I did make a lot of good progress in Gone with the Wind, and we are gonna talk about that later on when we get to the Friday Reads video. I also started an audiobook that I am halfway through right now. The big book news this week is that Douglas Stewart announced he is releasing a book in 2022. The title will be Young Mungo. So between Shuggie Bain and Young Mungo, there's a real definite feel to his titles. I am very excited about that book. I will put a link down below to the announcement about the book, and it will have a little bit about what it is about plot-wise. I am one of those people who enjoyed Shuggie Bain, and I am looking forward to seeing what Douglas Stewart does next. It is a little heartening to know that this is, in a similar way to Shuggie Bain, based on experiences he had in his life, and I think that sense of authenticity really does him well, so I'm looking forward to that book. Another reason I did not get a whole lot of posting or anything else done, or reading done this week, is that last weekend was Pride in Montana. They delayed Pride until July because they didn't want Pride to conflict with Juneteenth in this state. So we had Pride last weekend, and it was a lot of fun. It was in Helena, Montana, so we drove over on Friday as soon as I finished work and editing last week's Friday Reads video. And it was so much fun. I don't know if it was that it's been a long time since we really had any kind of a gathering like that. I don't know if it's that the gathering was Pride. I don't know if it's just that we missed getting together with friends and family, which you haven't really been able to do for the last year. But it was a really good time, and we managed to have a little bit of time to ourselves, which was nice. Our foster son decided to stay in the hotel while we went to a bar and got a couple of drinks together. Parents' night out. It was fun. Got to spend a lot of time at the Montana Book Company and talk to the owners there. I just love that store. It's really great, and we got to walk around downtown and visit a lot of other stores, including the General Mercantile, which is the t-shirt that I'm wearing today. I got this last weekend. If you are ever in Helena, Montana, that is a fantastic store. They sell coffees and teas and all kinds of fun little knickknacks and stickers and things like that. It's a great store to just pop into if you need a gift, and I love it, and I'm glad I have a t-shirt for it now. I love t-shirts of bookstores, and I love t-shirts of great businesses, so this is one that definitely fits that. I think one of the reasons, and I'm just noticing that you can see Jamie napping on the chair right here. She's been barking out the window a lot today, but for the moment at least, she's pretty chill and quiet. Let's hope it lasts. As I was saying, one of the reasons I really like Pride in Montana is that it feels very meaningful. There were a couple of years where they were moving Pride around Montana, so each year it would be in a different city in Montana. And I really liked that because there was a sense of going into different communities and different levels of acceptance about gay people. But for the last few years, it's been headquartered in Helena, which is the state capital, and I actually think I prefer that. Pride was in Missoula one year, and I think that was the biggest Pride celebration that we've had in Montana, which made it a lot of fun, but it felt like a party, and the one in Helena feels a little bit more intimate, and it feels more meaningful. There are a lot more young people, there are a lot more families, and it is so nice as an adult to see these kids exploring and finding that there's a community out there that will support them and help them grow. I just love that. And I think that's one of the reasons I really love Montana Book Company, because every time I am in that store, you see young people who are part of the LGBTQ community who are excited to be occupying a space that supports them. And that's what I feel every time I go to Pride in Montana. And I just absolutely love it. It warms the cockles of my heart and all that. Just makes me absolutely happy, and it makes me enjoy the place that I live. Which ties into the question that I'm going to cover this week. If you follow along, you are aware that I am trying to finish off the questions from my 3K Q&A. That's my husband who just walked by. All of you who wanted to meet him, there he was. So the one I have for today is from Joni Heisenberg, and it is, what are the best and worst parts about living in Montana? And I think everything I was saying about Pride applies here. In some ways, living here makes it feel like you can move the needle in meaningful ways and make a difference in people's lives. And I am not a very revolutionary person, but I am not someone who hides who I am or anything like that. I will be very open and honest about that. So I feel like my own quiet act of revolution is just being part of a gay couple in a community where people might not expect that. I remember one time when marriage equality was ruled upon by the Supreme Court, I ended up having a discussion with two of my coworkers at the time because they were publicly, because this was a radio station, saying that they did not think marriage equality was a good thing. And I had to respectfully point out to them that they were talking about me. And I think one of them had a sort of eye-opening moment, the other one not so much, but you know, that's one person who thought a little bit differently about the topic from there, and that was nice and meaningful. So there's that. It's also a beautiful place, and I will say during the pandemic, it was nice that we were able to get out and go for a walk and not necessarily need to worry about being around people. Like, I could get in my car and drive for 15 minutes or a half hour, however long I want, and be in an area that there are not a lot of other people at. So we could get outside, we could go for hikes and things like that. And we weren't missing that part of our livelihood during 2020 when everything else was going on in the world. I lived in or around big cities for most of my life. This is the first time I have not lived in anything that was even attached to a big city. And I was really ready for that change in my life. So people are frequently surprised when they hear that I relocated here from New York City, but it's exactly what I wanted out of life, and I'm happy to be here. As for the worst things, sometimes it does get a little bit wearing to feel like you have to sort of educate people about your life. Like, we had a neighbor for a while, not a direct neighbor, but somebody who lived a couple of houses down, who would forbid her children to say hello to us if we were walking on the street, and who would try to rush her children inside if we were walking the dogs past their house. And that's not fun at all. She eventually got over it and didn't run the kids inside, wasn't afraid to let them say hello to us, and then they moved away anyway. Things like that can wear down on you. It did have a positive slant in the end, because I feel like we probably made a little bit of a difference, at least in that person's attitude toward other LGBTQ people. But it's not always fun. And I will say, we've never had a problem. But since the last election, I feel like I'm thinking about a lot. You see more signs that are sort of antagonistic toward the government, and that's kind of scary. Hopefully things are gonna mellow out over time, but it's only been over the last year that you've seen that. So I'm hoping that whatever got spiked up and encouraged, and the fire that's been fed by the former president and people in his administration and the awful governor that we have, is hopefully gonna die down. and things will get back to the way they were before all of this got stoked up. We'll see how that goes. And I want to be clear, I don't feel unsafe living here, but it does kind of worry you a little bit. So let's move into the actual Friday Reads portion of this video. I have been working on a print book and an audiobook this week. Let's get the audiobook out of the way first, actually. It's The Tuscan Child by Rhys Bowen. This is something that I am reading because I need to fill a slot on my bingo card for Montana Book Company, which is a recommendation from a friend. And this is something that a close friend of the family recommended to me last year, so I figured I would get around to it. Now, being honest, I feel like I haven't paid great attention to this book, but I talked to my husband who actually read this last year, and he kind of felt the same way. He says that it feels sort of deliberately confusing in the first half, and then things start falling into place. So I'm halfway through, so hopefully things will start falling into place. But maybe because I've been so busy this week, it just feels like I don't know where I'm at with this book. And I'm hoping that in the last half, I'll sort through that a little bit. I do worry that I didn't give it the attention it may have needed. There are two storylines. In one, a man parachutes into Italy after his plane is shot down, and he is hidden by an Italian woman, and she's nursing him back to health so that the German troops won't find him. The other storyline is his daughter after his death, obviously many years later, and she finds out that he had been in Italy and maybe had another son. It's sort of nebulous, and this is where I don't know if it's that I'm not quite paying attention or if the book is deliberately being confusing. But she goes to Italy to find out about that part of her father's life. And the stories go back and forth. And it's interesting. It seems well written, but I just feel like I'm at a remove from it, if I'm being completely honest. It's just the way it is. Let's talk about the print book, because I have a lot more to say about that. It is obviously Gone with the Wind. If you have been following along, this is something I'm doing for my Pulitzer Prize project. This won the Pulitzer Prize in 1937, I believe. I did not make a lot of progress in it when I reported in for my Friday Reads last week. I did make a lot of progress in it this week, but I still have so much to go because this is a big book. So here's the front of the book. Here's my bookmark. I made a lot of progress this week, and yet it looks like I haven't even dented the thing. So that doesn't feel great. But I know I did make a lot of progress. I am on page 243 right now out of 1,037. That's 150 pages ahead of where I was last week. So I made a lot of progress, but there's just so much to do. And I was really hoping to finish this by the end of July. So we're in crunch mode right now. If I were able to put in a really good run of reading over the next week, I can finish it. But if it carries into August, that's going to be fine. I do have a buddy read planned for the beginning of August, but we'll see. If I need to finish this in August, I'll make it work. So where am I at with this? In the first 100 pages of this book, I was feeling pretty frustrated because it's not so subtly racist in a lot of parts, and the things that Margaret Mitchell is doing in this are really overt. Basically, Margaret Mitchell had grown up in the South, and she grew up after the Civil War, but she heard stories of the Old South, and her intention with Gone with the Wind was to sort of romanticize the Old South and make it seem like this really great thing. The next 150 pages have been a little more complicated. Her mother was a suffragist, which I think makes a lot of sense because there is a lot of feminist work in here. And it reveals a lot of hypocrisies about society and sort of silly things about society. How young girls are trained to get a husband and have this exuberant personality, which they are only able to exhibit for roughly 2 or 3 years while they are out in society. And once they get married, they're supposed to shut all of that away and completely turn off that portion of their life. And it doesn't really make sense. In case you can't tell, I spent a lot of time this morning looking at Margaret Mitchell's biography, and part of that is because I was trying to figure out a little bit about what she is doing in this book, and I was sort of questioning, is a lot of this deliberately racist? Now that I'm removed from the first 100 pages, which did have a lot of not so subtle racism, in it. It seems like it got a little more complicated, but only because she is calling out hypocrisies among society. But that's not necessarily a dig at the Old South and the politics of it. And there's a sense of futility about the war. Scarlett has it, Rhett Butler has it, Ashley Wilkes has it, where it seems like the whole thing is doomed from the beginning. But it also feels like she's doing that to add a sense of romanticism. It's almost Les Miserables-esque. Like the students who are revolutionaries and you know they're just going to get slaughtered. That's basically what she's doing here. Your instinct is to want to root for an underdog, and she is setting them up as a sort of glorious underdog. She does it very well. It is easy to get caught up in the story. I will say it's too long. Still too long. There's a portion where Scarlett, after the death of her first husband and the birth of her son, goes to Atlanta. And because she is a widow, she's not allowed to go out to parties. She can only wear black. She can't wear jewelry. She's not allowed to do any of the things that a woman her age, 17 by the way, would ordinarily be doing. She is supposed to act like she's already dead herself. And 5 pages of the same thing or variations on the same thing happen. And it's kind of like, oh my goodness, I get it. So it is a little too long. However, Margaret Mitchell is very good at her marketing. And I looked her up, and sure enough, yes, my initial impressions were absolutely right. She was pretty hardcore in the bag for the Confederacy. She did not even know that the South had lost the Civil War until she was 10 years old. And then she described being indignant about it, which is wild. And that's how she grew up. And, you would think that somebody would take a step back after finding out that this thing that they had been told stories about their whole life, and it turned out they lost, would take a step back and say, well, wait a minute, what is this all really about? And that's not what Margaret Mitchell did. She just became entrenched, like a lot of her family, in the subject matter. And it describes how Thomas Dixon Jr. was one of her favorite writers, to the point where she would enact dramatic readings of his work, including wearing a Ku Klux Klan robe in one of those reenactments. Like, she was really hardcore about it. If you're not familiar with Thomas Dixon Jr., I'm looking at his Wikipedia page right now. The first description of him is a white supremacist. He wrote a lot of works that promoted white supremacy, one of which inspired the movie Birth of a Nation. Like, it's not good. So I see why people get carried away in the story. I'm somebody who got carried away in the story. I watched the movie version of Gone with the Wind a lot as a child and never really questioned what Margaret Mitchell was doing. She's that good at it. You get caught up in the story and you start to think that she's exposing hypocrisies, but she's really just doing that as a sort of dig on society. There's a really sharp critique of society in here. She is not criticizing the South. And when she talks about what people are fighting for in the South during the Civil War, she always mentions states' rights. And if you live in the modern time, and if you're watching this, you do, you probably just shuddered because we hear states' rights all the time, especially in the last year. And the only person who acknowledges that slavery is part of what the South is fighting for is Rhett Butler. And that's because Rhett Butler is incapable of telling a lie. He's sort of that guy who doesn't care what people think, and he's going to tell the truth. And if it makes people angry, it makes people angry. And that does make him interesting as a foil to Ashley, because both of her love interests are essentially the same, except Ashley goes along with what is proper or seen as proper, and Rhett doesn't care about that, which is interesting. But the aspect of slavery is completely missing from her depiction of what the South was fighting for. And that's wild. So I'm on a roller coaster with this book. I see where people get caught up, because I get caught up in the writing too. She has this really great romantic flair for the story, and it draws you in. However, the underpinnings of this book continue to be pretty malicious and pretty malignant, I think, especially since this became such a best-selling book and then the movie became such a phenomenon. This ended up setting the tone in a lot of ways for the way we talk about the South and for the enduring legacy of the Confederacy. And that's wild and unfortunate. So I'm going to finish, but hoo boy, it's a lot. And that is my reading for this week. In terms of things coming up, I got to get through Gone with the Wind. I don't know what audiobook I will do once I finish The Tuscan Child. I don't know if I'll finish The Tuscan Child this weekend. I might try to put a push on that so I can do another one before the end of the month. We'll see how that goes. But I would love to hear what you have been reading this week, what you've loved, what you've hated. If you have read Gone with the Wind, are you grossed out? Or I did have a comment last week. I probably shouldn't talk about this right now. I'm not going to name the person, but I will say I got a comment that said it was one of their favorite novels of all time. They read it a long time ago, and they took it then as they take it now, as a piece of fiction set in a time with a lot of chaos and tumult of the period. I know there are flaws if you choose to compare it to the ideals of today, and if I were to approach all my reading experiences with the intent to make them all politically correct, I would narrow my reading considerably. I mean, sure. However, I think what is really significant, and again, what is malignant about this book, is that Margaret Mitchell isn't a product of the time, which is something I see about this a lot. It's like, oh yeah, it's not great, but it is a product of the time. Margaret Mitchell very much knew what she was doing. She knew what she was marketing. She knew what she was selling. She knew the image of the South that she wanted to create. And it was this sort of anti-Tom story, anti-Tom being like anti-Uncle Tom's Cabin, where you wanted to paint pictures of enslaved people being happy and loving their masters, and the South being this really peaceful place that it ended being sad that it went away. She's doing propaganda, and she knew she was doing propaganda in all likelihood. That's where this is a problem. She's not an innocent victim of us having a better understanding of race now, even though we have a pretty terrible understanding of race still to this day. She knew what she was doing. And she's so good at it that she made something that was wildly successful and really changed the conversation. So that's the problem. And that's the enduring conversation I'm going to be having about this book as I get through the next 800 pages of it. My will. Let's leave it there before I go on a rant. I'm going to go finish my workday, get this video edited, and have a weekend. And I hope you have a great weekend. As always, I really appreciate your time, and I will be back. Until next time, happy reading.